Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3.
Yeah, they can
Test
hear
1
you.
2 3.
Okay. All right, let's start this over. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me tonight. For those of you who may be new to the show, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel, and please don't forget to give the show a like. Also, this is the Christmas season. This is the last show for December. So I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for 2021. And God, it's got to be better than 2020. So, but tonight, you know what? I'm really excited. I had planned to have Drew on the show. Now, Drew has a YouTube channel, and he is into the zodiac, which is one of my favorite topics. But tonight's topic is my second favorite topic, and I did not know that Drew wrote a book called Out of Bounds: What Happened to the Yuba County Five. Now, I did a show a couple of years ago with Dave, but we just did it from information that we had gotten off the web. But Drew wrote a book, and I will do a show next year with Drew on Zodiac, because that's my all-time favorite, and I know an awful lot about the case, and I want to talk about that case with him. But I'm really excited to bring tonight this topic from his book. And like I said, it's on the Unsolved Mystery of the Yuba City Five. It's Bill Sterling, 29, Jack Hewitt, 24, Ted Weir, 32, Jack Madruga, 30, and Gary Mathias. And now in 1978, the five young men drove from Yuba City to Chico to watch a basketball game. They went to the game, but they never made it home. So we're really excited to bring Drew on to the show and talk about this case. Hey, Drew, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Noreen. I'm glad to be here.
Now, Drew, before we start the show, would you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I started probably about 2 years ago, started a YouTube channel. Like I said, I've always been into the mysteries. And, it's just 2 years ago, I decided to get serious about it. I always had favorite cases that I liked. I mean, I grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries, with Robert Stack, and that was kind of the genesis of it all for me. I like stories like D.B. Cooper. Obviously, we talked about the Zodiac. I love missing person stories, the David Paulides missing 411 stuff I'm a big fan of. Coast to Coast AM radio had a big influence on me, and other paranormal shows like yours are my favorites. So about 2 years ago, I just started writing books, and one was a paranormal story. It was actually about a haunted bed that my cousin had growing up. So I finally started writing about that, got it done, and did another story back to back with that, which was a kind of an Illuminati story. And then for my first full book, I wanted to write about the Zodiac Killer, and I never really, I knew about that case, but I never really had a firm suspect until one, appeared, and I wrote about that person, and it's just kind of been building ever since. So following Zodiac Killer, I did a D.B. Cooper book, which is a person of interest book about who I think D.B. Cooper was. And then the Yuba County Five came along, and I saw a YouTube video on it, and it was fascinating to me. That was probably just 6 months ago. I know this story's been out a long, long time, but I just missed it. So when I finally watched that video on YouTube, I was fascinated by it, and I just started wanting to gather up everything I could about this case of these five men that went missing in the Plumas National Forest in 1978, and everything just started kind of opening up for this book, and I think it's the best thing I've ever done.
Oh my God, I am so excited. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Now, Drew, would you tell them the story of the Yuba City Five?
Sure.
Okay, wait a minute before we start. Okay, listen. So Drew's going to tell you the story, and then when he's finished the story, then we're going to talk about the case, because I have a lot of questions, and I've written I've gone down to the timeline. So Drew will tell you the story. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Drew. Go ahead, honey.
Oh, not at all. And not to correct you, but it's actually the Yuba County Five. Some people do call it the Yuba City Five. Obviously, Yuba City is the largest city in Yuba County. But the Yuba County Five came from the small towns around Yuba City, like Olivehurst and Marysville, California, is where they were actually all from, those two small towns, whatever, are just right outside of Yuba City, California. But it is Yuba County Five is the moniker that they were given at some point. That's what they go by under the YouTube moniker. But like you said, we're talking about five men here, actually, and they lovingly referred to them as the boys because four of the men had developmental intellectual disabilities. Four of them did. That was, of course, Jackie Hewitt, Ted Weir, Bill Sterling, and Jack Madruga. They all had, just lighter forms of cognitive impairments. Back in that day, in 1978, a lot of people just referred to them as mildly retarded because we didn't have terms like on the spectrum back then, and they didn't really know how to classify some of these things that the slow learners had, which is what these four guys were. And they were all kind of varying scale. The worst off was Jackie Hewitt, and he probably had an IQ around 50, so he was very, very slow. And on the opposite end of that, you had Jack Madruga, which, according to his family, he was actually kind of smart. He was just very, very shy in social situations. So you had, kind of Jack at the top, and then you had Jackie Hewitt at the bottom for, really slow. And then in the middle, you had Bill Sterling and Ted Weir, which were literally, these were grown men. Like you said, their ages, they were men. But, those two guys were really like boys' bodies. And so that's kind of how they were lovingly referred to as the boys, even though they were grown men. And then the fifth person, which isn't included in the cognitive disability category, was a man named Gary Mathias. Now, Gary suffered from schizophrenia, so he was the outlier of this group and made up the fifth member. And he met the other guys in a vocational program called the Gateway Projects, and that was actually based in Yuba City, California, where they live near, and it started in 1971. And this was a recreational deal, and they taught these, it's kind of for any kind of wayward boys that it was for drug addicts too if they had problems. But it had of course the developmentally disabled, like four of these boys were. And Gary Mathias wound up going there for some drug counseling because he had drug issues in the past. He's been in the military and had abused drugs, and obviously he struggled with schizophrenia. And he wound up meeting the boys to teach them how to play basketball. That was their love together, was basketball. They played on a team called the Gateway Gators, obviously named after the Gateway Projects, and that was their Special Olympics team. And some of the boys had played on it the year prior, including Ted Weir. Their team won in 1977, and Ted got to go meet Sally Struthers, of course, of All in the Family fame in Los Angeles, and that was a big deal. So they were trying to win that tournament again in 1978, and they were all really excited about playing in that game that was going to be held on February 25th, 1978. But before this, the boys wanted to go see their favorite basketball team play, and it was the UC Davis Aggies, which they loved. They would talk about that team for hours, about statistics, the different players on the team. That's who they loved the most, and they were going to play the Chico State Wildcats in Chico, California, on Friday night, November 24th, 1978. So all the guys piled into Jack Madruga's 1969 Mercury Montego, and that wasn't just a car to Jack Madruga. It was literally his baby. I mean, Jack saved up the money to pay for it. He had a little bit of money coming in from serving in the military. Jack went over to Vietnam in 1969. He was a truck driver over there. He didn't see any really heavy action, but he did serve honorably in Vietnam, and then he got a job at some point after that. He went to college for a short period of time at Yuba City College, and he earned the money to pay for that car, and that was his baby, and he really pampered that car, and he was really paranoid about where he would drive it, things like that. But he was the main driver of that group. He and Gary Mathias were the only two of the five that had driver's licenses. The other three could not drive and did not have licenses. So Jack winds up picking up all the boys. He picks up Gary Mathias last. Actually, Ted Weir and Gary Mathias lived on the same street in Olivehurst, California. So on their way out, they stop at the Miko service station that Bill Sterling's parents ran. And Bill got his weekly allowance of $15, and they topped off Jack's car with gas. And they headed for an hour's drive north to Chico to watch their favorite team play. So by all accounts, the boys made it to Chico and watched the basketball game. I think it was an editor of the Chico newspaper was at the game and recalled seeing the boys. And they watched the game. There was no events that anyone reported any kind of, any altercation or anything going on at the game. So the boys left. They all piled back into Jack Madruga's Montego, and they went over to Bears Market to get some snacks for the hour ride back south home to the Yuba City area. And they got their snacks, got back in the car, started driving back south, and they were not heard from again after that night. They sometime around 3 a.m, I think it was Jack Madruga's mother, Melba, woke up, had fallen asleep, woke up at 3, and she knew something was wrong immediately because Jack was not home. And she began to call the other mothers of the other boys, and they said the same thing. Hey, our son has not come home either. And they knew immediately there was a problem because the guys had that huge Special Olympics game to play themselves that Saturday. And they knew this was totally out of character for these guys, all of them. Gary was being the outlier. It wouldn't have been strange for Gary by himself to not come home like that, but for the other 4, it's highly out of character, so they knew something was wrong. So they were supposed to meet up that Saturday morning at a local store to drive over to the game that's going to be held in Sacramento. And they knew then, when no one showed up to go to play in their game, that something was really, really wrong. And the police, they wound up calling the police that Saturday night, somewhere in the early evening, 6 or 7 p.m., something like that. And police got involved immediately. They knew something was wrong. These guys were missing. So the local Yuba County police get involved, and they, obviously they're searching for Jack Madruga's 1969 Montego, and the car is actually spotted that Saturday by I think it was a Plumas County, one of the sheriffs there noticed the car, but he didn't think it was unusual where it was parked, because people would park the road way up on it, where they found it was on the Oroville-Quincy Highway. And he didn't think much of it. So when he saw the report go out about these boys that were missing in this car they were looking for, he recalled seeing it that Saturday, February 25th, 1978, and he immediately contacted people. He went back up and did find the car on that following Monday. I think that was February 27th. And so the car was found, but the boys were not in it. The window was cracked down. It was a 2-door car, so the driver's side window was cracked. The car was locked by all accounts, and there was no sign of the boys. Inside the car, they found basketball programs. They found the wrappers from all the snacks. Inside the glove box were 4 perfectly folded maps, including one of the state of California in the area they were in. The car was found way off course from where they should have been from leaving Chico. It was about 2.5 hours away from the Yuba City, Marysville area, and it was to the northwest, just going up into the Plumas National Forest at an elevation of about 5,000 feet. A really cold, deserted road. They had no reason to be up there whatsoever, and so it was a huge mystery at that point. Here's the car, but none of the boys are anywhere. So when they found the car, the police hotwired it, and it started immediately. There was no mechanical problems with the car whatsoever. It had a 1/4 tank of gas left in it, so it didn't run out of gas. And with it being starting up so easy, there was no mechanical issues with the car. It did look like it had gotten slightly stuck in the snowbank, but it was nothing that 5 grown men, and these guys all played basketball, they were all in pretty good shape, could have easily pushed the car out. And I do know that Jack Madruga would have absolutely known to have turned his car around if he was lost. So herein lies the building of this huge mystery. How did 5 guys like that just disappear? So the search starts in earnest, and they're turning up nothing. And the snow was, really fell heavy on that Saturday, and it made the searching really difficult because they're searching this perimeter around the car, and nothing's turning up. They're not finding any trace of these boys. And sometime it's not exactly known when a witness comes forward. A guy named Joseph Shones came forward after hearing about the story in the news about the boys being missing, and he came forward and said, "Hey, I saw these guys that Friday night." And his story went that he was driving his VW Beetle way up on the Oroville-Quincy Highway in advance of a ski weekend he wanted to spend with his wife and daughter the next day. So he was going up that road to check the snow line around a cabin that he owned way up there, up that road. And he said he drove up there that night, his car stalled out. And he he got out of his car, and I think he remembers this happening. He went up late in the afternoon, but he thinks this was happening sometime around 7 p.m. You know, his recollections were really not that great. So he gets out of his VW Beetle after it gets stuck to try to push it out. And in doing so, he suffers a mild heart attack. And he's in a lot of pain from this heart attack. So all he knows how to do is just get back into his car with the engine still running for the heat. And he gets back in, the heater's on. And at some point, I think he kind of drifts off or something, doesn't know much of what's going on. And then sometime around what he thinks is about midnight, he sees some headlights come up behind him. And he gets out of his car, and he's yelling for help. You know, help, help, I just had a heart attack. Will you please come help me? And he sees what looks like about 5 figures walking around this car that parked behind him. It's roughly about 20 yards behind him or so. And he's like, help me. He knows they can hear him, but they're not responding to his cries for help. And he looks at him, and he's frustrated that they won't come help him. And he thought he saw a woman with a baby and things like that. And after he cried for help one more time, all the figures seem to get back in the car, but the headlights go out, and nothing more comes of it. So he gets back in the car for the heat, goes back to sleep, or just kind of suffering with this pretty good amount of pain from this heart attack he's having. And then he thinks it's somewhere around 3 a.m. in the morning. He sees another set of headlights come up behind him. And then he thinks, later said he thought he saw another truck pull up behind that car. And again, he sees some figures around the car, and what he said was some whistling noises. And then he sees what he believed were flashlight beams, like people looking around this car. And again, he gets out of his VW Beetle and says, please help me. I've had a heart attack. Please, help me. I need to get help. And again, the flashlights get turned off. Seems like the figures get back into the car. The lights go out, and nothing more comes of it. So he's really upset now that for a second time now, no one's helping this poor man who just had a heart attack. And that was the first and maybe the only sighting of the Yuba County 5 during the time that it happened. And sometime, and I think it was about another week after Joe Shones came forward with his sighting, and a lady in the town of Brownsville, California, claimed that she saw the guys at a convenience store. And she said they were in a red truck, which would have been highly out of character for any of them not to have been in Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. Was the only car they ever all rode around in. So, the police took that sighting pretty credible, thought she was credible. The store owner kind of backed the lady up. He claimed he saw these boys as well the following Saturday and the following Sunday in Brownsville. And Brownsville is about an hour away from where the car was left abandoned up near a place called Rogers Cow Camp in the Plumas National Forest. And, so it's pretty far off course as well. But then a theory was developing that Gary Mathias had a friend in Forbstown, California, which was just literally adjacent to Brownsville. So these theories developed that maybe the boys were going to see Gary's friend and took a wrong turn or something like that, or maybe they somehow wound up in Brownsville and that sighting was credible. But all the families kind of shot that sighting down. There had been a reward out. I think it was $3,000 at that time. And, none of the families really had any money. They're very working class, worked very hard. And they, kind of had to put it all together just to raise that much money. I think the highest they got to was about $4,500. But there was reward posters out, and that's what the woman in Brownsville had claimed to see of the boys, and that's why she thought she saw them. But that sighting just never really went anywhere. But the one that did get a lot of publicity was the one of Joe Shones. So that was reported in the papers, and there's so many inaccuracies in the newspaper reports of this story, and we could talk a little bit more about that later. But so the search continues. The Shones sightings turns up nothing, and then sometime in early June, I'm looking for the date, some motorcycle riders recreational riders are riding through the Plumas National Forest, and they come upon this. It's a Forest Service camp, which is there. It wasn't manned at the time, but it was a trailer that was owned by the Forest Service, and it was there for in case there was wildfires when they'd have to man that trailer. But a lot of them are manned, but this one just didn't happen to be. And there was 4 sheds around that trailer, and these motorcycle riders pulled up just looking to take a break. They'd been riding all day, and one of the riders got off their motorcycles and they start walking towards the trailer. And this rider smelled something really bad, really putrid, and he took off his helmet, and it got even stronger when he took his helmet off, so he thought there was a dead animal around there. And then he somehow figures out that it's coming from the main, the Forest Service trailer. So he walks up the steps, the door's unlocked, he walks in there and sees the body of Ted Weir laying on a bed, completely emaciated. He had died from the cold, from exposure, being there. Ted lost about 60 to 80 pounds. At one point, Ted Weir weighed about 200 pounds, and he literally laid there and just slowly died. And he had severe frostbite to his feet. I think the majority of his toes were missing. And he was covered up with 8 blankets pulled up. I mean, they were literally bed sheets pulled up to his neck, perfectly lined up, and as if somebody was there caring for him for some time. No one else was found in the trailer. They found some sea ration foods that were there. I mean, there was enough food, they found out, that could have kept all 5 of those men alive for months, literally, probably for a year, in one of the adjacent trailers. But only 30 of the cans were open, which was really unusual. So they're assuming that at least obviously Ted Weir made it there, and that's where he died. And it was later determined that Ted lived for about 8 to 10 weeks from the date the boys were missing in that trailer, literally freezing to death. And knowing he or whoever else may have made it to the trailer never started a fire. There was paperback books everywhere. They could have built a fire outside with no problem. There was matches in the trailer. There was a propane tank in the back. In another shed, all you had to do was flip on the switch, and it would have provided ample heat to that trailer. And no one found it. And no one really got into any more food than the 30 cans that were found inside the trailer. So that was the first discovery of what happened to these boys after all those months of searching, because the snow had finally melted enough that these guys were able to find that trailer. So, of course, they reported it to the police. Police came up and started searching the immediate area around the trailer. And I believe 2 days after the discovery of Ted's body, they found the body of Jackie Hewitt and they found Jack Madruga first with Bill Sterling not far away. And those guys were actually 2 best friends. And, it wouldn't have been out of character for those guys that have just died walking, from Jack Madruga's car to the Forest Service trailer. And the authorities felt like those 2 guys just got so cold walking from Jack's car, walking up that mountain pass to that trailer, they just laid down to go to sleep and died and never made it to the trailer. They think that Gary Mathias made it. Obviously, we know Ted Weir made it, and possibly Jackie Hewitt made it to the trailer. But at some point, the day after they found the bodies of Sterling and Madruga, they found the remains of Jackie Hewitt. And it was actually the brother to his brother-in-law that found his remains. Of course, they've been ravaged by animals. It's just bones. And he found most of the remains of Jackie Hewitt. All 3 of those remains were identified with dental records for those 3. And actually, Jackie Hewitt's father found his backbone inside his jacket when it was really, really tragic. You just can't believe the amount of tragedy involved with something like that. Bill Sterling's father found his remains as well. He was there. Well, actually, he was there when they were found. And they found Bill Sterling's wallet. He had a photograph in it. And Jim Sterling, which is his father, called out, said, "How do you know it's him?" And the officer said, "Well, there's the photos here, sir," meaning of Bill Sterling's twin sisters. And then, that's how they confirmed, at least on site, that was the body of Bill Sterling. And, so his father just fell to the ground in total desperation, weeping. A friend of his was there consoling him. I actually have a photo of that from the newspaper. It's really sad. And so that began the mystery in earnest. What they never found, though, was Gary Mathias. They searched and searched for many days, months after they found the bodies of the other 3. And, of course, Ted being the first, so now 4 of them are accounted for. But never until this day, until now, we still don't know what happened to Gary Mathias. He's still, his remains are either out there somewhere in the Plumas National Forest, or he somehow made it out. And, with Gary, he had such a strange past that he made it out of those woods and is somewhere homeless. I mean, he had schizophrenia, and when he wasn't on his medication, he could get really, really bad. So not being on it for that amount of time, Gary could be anywhere doing anything. So naturally, Gary becomes a suspect in what happened to his 4 friends because of that and because of his lies the mystery of the Yuba County Five. You know, all the questions come up. Why didn't they eat more food? Why didn't they start a fire? Why didn't they, there's just so many things that didn't happen there. And the main question is, what forced these 5 grown men to flee a perfectly running car and go up a mountain, not down? Usually when you're lost, you'll go down a mountain to get help. But for some reason, they went up into that mountain. They were wearing street clothes, of course, and it was freezing. And, a lot of the newspaper accounts say that the trailer was 19 miles from where Jack's car was abandoned at Rogers Cow Camp.
Damn.
And it really wasn't that far. I mapped this out. It was closer to about 11 miles, but far enough. And, they don't know exactly the path they took. They think they may have taken the path left by a snowcat vehicle that cleared away to that Forest Service trailer the day before the boys went missing, because it had to clear the snow off the roof so it wouldn't collapse. And they think the boys may have found that track left by the snowcat, and just once they saw it, they thought it would lead somewhere. So they just kept going deeper and deeper up that mountain until, at least 2 of them died on the way up, and maybe 3 of them made it to the trailer. And but it still doesn't answer the question why they left a perfectly running car that they would have definitely, at least I know Jack Madruga and Gary Mathias. Remember, Gary, when he was on his medication, which he had been, was perfectly fine. I mean, he would make good, decent decisions. He wasn't, when his schizophrenia was under control, he was fine. So there's really no reason why Gary would have been not starting a fire, or why these 4 or 5 grown men would just flee. And that's where you start seeing all of the comparisons of this case with the Dyatlov Pass incident that happened in Russia. Of course, that happened in 1959, where the Russian hikers went missing. And, it was odd because it was cold. That both events happened in February. So there's some similarities there for sure. And, a lot of people think maybe something paranormal happened to these guys that kind of forced them up that road, scared them so bad that they fled the car in a panic and tried to find their way to some safety. And, of course, with the Dyatlov Pass incident, you had the campers, people don't know that story, slashing their way out of their tents, and really strange beginnings there. That's why you'll often hear Yuba County 5 case be called the American Dyatlov Pass incident, because of those similarities.
Right.
Really strange. And there's so many theories of what could have happened to these boys. And my goal was to track down every single one of them and see which ones had merit or not. And I can't tell you, as much as I know about this case, which I think is more than anyone in the world now, I can't tell you exactly what happened to those boys. I can tell you what the families believe, and I can tell you every theory out there of what may have happened. And it could be a combination of all of them. But that's where we are right now with the Yuba County 5. We just don't know. And Gary is still missing. He's still listed as a missing person to this day.
Well, the families believe that they were lured up there. That's
true.
And not only that, the retired Jack Beecham, who was the Yuba City sheriff, he said that he's convinced that whatever took the boys up to those woods, it wasn't their own doing. And he said they were either forced or manipulated. And he says, and where does Mathias fit into all of this? He believes that Mathias had something to do with it. And another thing that I found was that Gary Mathias had repeatedly told a longtime acquaintance of a dream that he used to have, a reoccurring dream, that he and several other people would disappear. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yes, that was reported by a friend of Gary's. And there was an article, in the Sacramento Bee that came out in 2019. It's probably the most recent, longer article on this case that came out. Of course, it was in Sacramento, which isn't far away from the area. So a lot of people that follow the case really closely up there. And it was written by a guy named Benji Egel, E-G-E-L, and it was very critical of Gary Mathias. And it revealed a lot of information about Gary's past that people did not know up till that point. And one was a story where Gary had gone to stay with his grandmother in Corvallis, Oregon, and I think he got kind of crossways with his grandmother, and he wound up walking home 536 miles back to Marysville, literally walking. I don't, maybe he hitchhiked some of it, but everyone's, that in his bank, swore this is true. He walked that whole distance. He lived off of milk that was left on porches, dog food, cat food, whatever he had to do to survive. Now, Gary was a survivor. I can tell you that. He had mental illness, but this guy was a survivor. He was in a mental institution once and wound up literally breaking out of there by going through a pipe under the building, like the Shawshank Redemption.
Oh,
stuff.
my God.
And that's documented. And this guy is just really a survivor. I mean, he's just really tough. I mean, maybe it's because of the way his brain is wired. I don't know, but Gary is an interesting guy. And, that article revealed a lot of that about Gary's past and a lot about the violence that was in Gary's past. When he got out of the Army, he, fell into a group around Olivehurst that was really heavy into drugs, and drug trafficking was going through the area and all kind of bad stuff. A lot of guys that he knew were in prison and things like that. And there was one incident where Gary was at his cousin's house, and his cousin's wife was in her bedroom recovering from a surgery, so she was on a lot of heavy pain medicine. And Gary was watching TV with his cousin, and then Gary walked off to go to the bathroom, and then when he didn't come back really soon, his cousin went looking for him and found him in the bedroom straddling his wife, like an attempted sexual assault on his wife. And so, of course, his cousin called the police, and, Gary got in trouble for that. He had an incident where he punched a police officer. So Gary had a very, very violent past. And a lot of it was due, and I'm not putting this off on it, when he was not on his right drug combination, he would be very volatile, very violent, a lot of barroom brawls kind of stuff. And that was Gary. And he was, but by all accounts, for at least the 2 years leading up to the boys going missing, Gary was a big success story from his doctors. Once they got his medicine combination right for schizophrenia, he did not have almost, hardly any incidents at all. And the night they went missing, he was as much looking forward to playing in that game the next day as the other four boys. He was really excited about it. He was like, he had told his mom several times, "Don't let me oversleep, Mom. Don't let me oversleep." He was just excited about it as anybody. So, there are things against Gary being involved with what happened to the guys, even with his shady past and his really gritty determination to live. It was just one of those things. But I will say this is a fact. The other boys were afraid of Gary. They did not want him to go to the game with them to Chico that night. That's not reported at all. That was actually told to me by Jack Madruga's niece that I know well. And she said, yeah, the boys were very, very scared of Gary for sure. And I'll tell you this, talking to Jack Madruga's niece, her name is Kathy, and she was a little older. See, Jack was the youngest of his siblings, and his cousins were a little older, so they weren't that far apart in age. I think he was about 7 or 8 years older than Kathy, and then maybe 10 years older than his nephew, George Madruga, which I also know and interviewed for my book. And Kathy told me something that was really fascinating. She said she saw Gary Mathias after the disappearance, and that's the only credible account I've ever heard of that. No one knows about this. And she told me, I knew Gary Mathias, I knew what he looked like, and I saw him come into a bar in the Yuba County area. I can't remember the town, but her parents owned a bar, and she was there, and she thinks this was about maybe 3 or 4 months after they discovered the bodies. So she walks out of the bathroom at this bar, and it's called La Casa Blanca was the name of it, and she looks across the bar, and she sees Gary Mathias sitting at the bar, and she can't believe it. This guy's either supposed to be dead up in the mountains or who knows where.
Oh
and
God.
She tells her mom, Gary's out there. Gary's up front. And her mom says, call the police. So by the time the police get called, Gary's no longer there. So the police talked to Kathy and said, are you sure? Because there had been a few other sightings in that area of Gary. They saw him at, the 7-Eleven store or the JCPenney in Yuba City, or another store in Marysville. So there was other sightings going on in that period of time, about 4 or so months after the discovery of the body. So we're talking about August or so, maybe early September. And but she swears she saw Gary. So she went down to the police station, and they showed her a photo lineup, kind of testing her. She said they had photos of Gary that they had kind of doctored. I don't know if how they did it back then before the piece of Photoshop, but to see how well she knew what he looked like, and she aced it. And they were impressed. They were like, maybe you did see him, which is strange because a lot of people just think Gary died up in those mountains. He just made it further away to where his remains were never found. But I can tell you that Kathy firmly believes she saw Gary at that bar. She's probably not 100%, but about 99.9% sure she saw Gary Mathias, which is huge. I don't know if I believe her or not. I think she definitely believes it, and I think it's possible because this case is so strange. Every time you think you can figure something out, you go back to the drawing board. It's like a Jenga puzzle that as soon as you have this awesome base, it just goes falling apart on you.
Well, how could he hide out this long without anybody else noticing him?
Well, maybe he got out of the area. He might have just, with the schizophrenia, maybe just found his way out. He could still be out there in some homeless camp somewhere knowing Gary, because one strange thing about him was he would forget. When he was off his medication, he would forget things, but he was kind of like an animal. His sister. I talked to Gary's sister. Gary had two sisters, and one of them is deceased. Her name was Tammy. Tammy's the one I talked to. One of his sisters is deceased. The other is still living. Her name is Tammy. And no one's ever interviewed her about this case before. They could never find her, but I did. And she had such great tales to tell about this case that no one ever found and straightened out a lot of things. I mean, there was always this I don't know if it was a rumor or fact, but they always said the TV show Unsolved Mysteries was going to do a huge case, the original one. And they got four of the families to agree, and they could not get the Mathias family to agree to do that show. And that put a lot of more doubt on the Mathias' and Gary's involvement in it, because the family wouldn't participate in that. And I asked Tammy about that. She said, I had never heard that ever in my life. She said, my mother would have absolutely told me, or I would have remembered. We would have loved that exposure. So, so many things about the story just got told over and over the years that might not even be true. But she had a lot of interesting things to say.
Now Gary was violent, and he probably could have committed murder. Now, with this reoccurring dream that he had, do you think he took, since they were going home, and I don't know, I don't think the boys got lost, but he might have enticed them to go up into that mountain, and instead of killing them, what do you think he did? He didn't kill them, but they got out of. Now the car could have been moved. It showed the wheels had spun, but it wasn't deep enough where the boys could not. They could have pulled the car out and driven out of there
easily. And going back to that, I'm glad you touched on that. Was it the fact that the police, when they found Jack Madruga's car and towed it back, so that the front's lifted. Back then, one of those old style records, they drove it back to the town of Oroville, which is about an hour from where the car was found at the Rogers Cow Camp. The authorities noticed something very unusual about the car, and it was that the underside of Jack Madruga's car showed absolutely no damage whatsoever. No ruts were in it. No scrapes. There was no scrape on the tailpipe, and this is a pretty low-to-the-ground, heavy American car that had 5 grown men in it, going up a pretty desolate road on the Oroville-Quincy Highway in the snow that could be very rutted depending on what time of the year when any recent repairs done. Well, that led the police to believe that whoever drove the car up that lonely, desolate road must have known the road to avoid the ruts. Like somebody that knew it so well, they could just know how to kind of jog to the right, jog to the left, to miss all those imperfections in the road. So I can tell you what I believe about that.
Yeah.
I can tell you Jack Madruga drove his own car up that road. However that ties in, I don't know. And this is why. If someone else drove that car, whether somebody involved in foul play or, hey, move over, we're going to, had a gun on them or whatever, and drove them all up that road, they're not going to care about rutting out Jack's prized possession car. But Jack would. And he would literally, his cousin, his nephew, George Madruga, told me he was so obsessed about that car, he didn't even want a scratch on the underside of it. And if he had to go down on a really bad, one time he refused to go down a certain road because he knew that it would happen to his car, and he refused to take someone home. And he literally made him get out of the car and walk back to their house, which was half a mile or so, because he refused to go down that road. And he was a good driver, and he certainly had enough sense to turn the car around. But I firmly believe he drove his own car up there. because anyone else that would have done it would not have cared, even if they knew the road, to try to avoid the ruts in it. They would have just been in a hurry, whether they were, just dump the guys out, force them by gun to flee up that mountain. And I just, knowing how Jack was about that car, from what I've been told, I believe he drove his own car up that road. And however that plays into all the other theories, it can be done in several ways. But when you talk about could Gary make them do things? Yeah, they did fear Gary. But the strange thing about it is somebody was taking care of Ted Weir. There's no way Ted could have been taking care of himself, because he would have been in so much pain from the gangrene and the frostbite to his feet that even pulling those bed sheets up to his neck like that would have been extremely painful for him. So somebody was there caring for him. And when they found the body of Ted Weir, his shoes were missing. And he had bigger feet than Gary, but they found Gary Mathias' sneakers there.
Yeah.
So what the police surmised was that Gary swapped shoes with Ted. And, because Gary might have had frostbitten feet that had swollen up from it, and Ted's, sturdier leather shoes would have been a better option. So they think at some point after maybe, Ted died, Gary put on his shoes and headed out into the woods trying to survive for himself. So Gary is most likely the one, they believe made it with Ted and possibly Jackie Hewitt. And when I talked about the food that was found, these were, the Army canned sea ration stuff. And they know that at least one of them, maybe more, was opened with what they call a P-38 can opener.
Right.
And the only two men that would have known how to use one of those was either Gary Mathias, because he had been in the Army, he was stationed in Germany, or Jack Madruga, who had been in Vietnam. So if Jack didn't make it, it almost has to mean that Gary Mathias was in that trailer and taking care of Ted Weir. So if he was out to kill them all, I don't know why he would let Ted live for so long unless he was just having a psychotic break. And when they found the remains of the other boys, of course, they were just bones that had already been ravaged by animals, so there would have been no way to determine if they had been not, shot with a gun or anything, unless there was any kind of indent, kind of something on one of their bones. But nothing like that was found.
Oh, hold on for a second.
I don't think Gary did it.
Hold on for a minute. Wow. Let me fix my camera. Don't know why it did that. Come on. Okay. Well, the thing is, I know they were mentally handicapped, but they could have gotten heat. There was I forget what they said that was there, but they could have gotten heat inside of that trailer. And why didn't do you think they just couldn't figure it out? I mean, it had to have been right there.
There was paperback books for kindling. There was matches in the trailer. There was, of course, propane, but the shed that the propane tank was in was a little bit obscured by the snow, so they may have missed that. Now, a guy like Ted Weir would have never been able to do any of that stuff. Actually, when Ted was a little younger, they had a fire at his house, and one of his brothers, I think it was Perry Weir, tried to wake him up, said, "Hey, there's a fire here, Ted, wake up, or, the house is on fire." And Ted didn't want to leave the house because he had to go to work the next day. So, Ted was pretty bad off as far as, knowing what to do in a situation like that. So he certainly couldn't have. But Gary would have at least known how to start a fire. Being in the Army, assuming, because, those medicines that he was on would have lasted for a little while, at least a week before he would start getting, really succumbing to his schizophrenia. I would think he would have lasted a while. So it's really odd that Gary, presumably if he made it to that trailer, would not have started a fire. Or if whatever they were scared of scared them so bad they didn't want to call attention to themselves. They think maybe the reason was they didn't get into any more food was because they, thought it was stealing. But then again, that only applies to 4 of those boys and not Gary. Because Gary would, when he's on his medicine, operates just like anybody else. He knows how to start a fire. He knows how to go find food and things like that. So it's just another one of those odd things. It seems like Gary did make it to that trailer for whatever reason, but he didn't do anything more to, get heat or to eat the food. And And if he was there, I think he was the one that took care of Ted Weir.
That's weird. So why didn't the four boys? Okay, they were afraid of Gary, but the four boys were really good friends. Why didn't they just stick together instead of separating?
You know, they should have, and they were always told to by their parents. They said, "Always stick together, boys." And you know, when they found the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling together, those guys were really close. So it wasn't a big shock that they were found that close together, and probably, you know, died just trying to make it up to that trailer. And you know, they and the other three probably made it. So it takes you to all these other theories, and I'll go through those really quick. One of them was there could have been a brawl at the Bears Market after the basketball game in Chico, and Tammy, Gary's sister, told me that she heard that, and there were some pretty strong rumors to it. The lady working at Bears Market that night remembered the boys coming in after the game. She said they were in really high spirits. It was all five of them when they bought their snacks. She said she remembers being a little upset with them because they came in right at closing time, so it took her a little longer to shut the store down. But there were later some really strong rumors that some kind of fight broke out in the parking lot at Bears Market, either by someone that knew one of the boys or maybe a fan of the Chico basketball team because they were in their territory. And obviously their team lost that night, and here's these five guys. It seemed like, you know, something's wrong with some of them, or cheering on the visiting team that won. So, you know, there's some theories that built up around that. And one of them was around Jackie Hewitt, because when Jackie Hewitt got in distress, he would make this really strange noise, you know, grunting noise, like kind of noise he would make. And some guys grabbed Jackie, and they were kind of slapping him around, you know, harassing him in the parking lot. And Gary would always come to their defense because Gary was a fighter and Gary wasn't scared. So Gary went up to try to defend Jackie, got Jackie away. So part of that theory goes that they were followed from Bears Market and maybe got chased up that mountain road all the way that far up the road. And, you know, the lady that worked at Bears that night never reported a brawl, but, you know, we just don't know if any of that's true, but that story had been circulating a long, long time. Now, I can tell you that two of probably the strongest belief theory, and at least for one of the families, and some members of the others, is the fact that Gary Mathias was targeted by a local person who was literally called a town bully around the Marysville, Olivehurst area, that Gary knew well, and this guy was just a bad guy. I researched this person. He's still alive. I can't say what his name is, but he was just a bad person, had a really bad reputation, had been to prison for a lot of stuff. And I mean, you think Gary's bad, he was nothing compared to this guy. And the guy had it out for Gary, and he knew Gary was going to the game in Chico that night. So as this story goes, and this story's been told over and over in the area of Yuba City, Marysville, and a lot of people there, I can tell you, firmly believe this particular story I'm going to tell you. So the guys leave, and somehow this bad guy with some of his friends catch up with Jack Madruga's car with the boys in it somewhere around the Oroville Dam, or actually right at the bridge of the Oroville Dam. Now, this is still about an hour away from where they eventually found Jack Madruga's car. But the story is all the boys got out, a fight ensued. It kind of goes back to the other story where they were picking on Jackie Hewitt. He was making these crying noises. Gary got involved and punched the guy, and then they all started jumping on Gary and beat him up pretty bad and threw him over the bridge into the water at the Oroville Dam. And then after that, the other guys were put back into Jack Madruga's car. Another man drove the car up the Oroville Highway to where it was abandoned, and they forced the guys out by gunpoint to run up into those mountains. And I can tell you that one of the families firmly believes this is what happened, and a lot of people around the area believe this story. And there's different versions of it, but they're all pretty similar. And they all surround Gary Mathias being killed when he was thrown over the dam, body never found, other four being driven up that road to where the car was found and run up that mountain road. And it still prevails to this day, that story. And the only things that work against that, of course, is why did they find Gary's tennis shoes in the trailer if he was thrown over the Oroville Dam before they got up there? You know, someone would have to have been pretty astute to remember hey, guys, here's Gary's shoes, put them over there just to throw off authorities. I don't know. I can't explain it. Was there a mistake that those were Gary's shoes? I don't know. But I can tell you that theory I just talked about is firmly believed by a lot of the people. And I can tell you who I'm most suspicious of, knowing this story, and I don't go in hard on this theory, but I think this person probably had a lot more to do with it, was the witness Joseph Shones, who was driving the VW Bug that we talked about earlier, because his story just never totally added up, and it changed quite a bit. He, when he first came out with it, he talked about the people not coming to his help. He said he had a mild heart attack, and that was proven later by doctors that he did suffer a mild heart attack. But so many other aspects of the story didn't really seem to add up. One is that he said he got back into his car for heat. Well, an old VW Bug, and this was 1978, so he's got an older one. It's an air-cooled engine. It doesn't really provide really any heat, when it's idle and not moving. An air-cooled engine will really only generate sufficient heat when you're driving and the car is moving. So it seems a little odd. And, I didn't finish Shone's story from originally, but he said when the people didn't come to his aid after the second sighting at around 3 a.m., he surmised, he walked about 6 miles back down that road to the place called Mountain House. It was a lodge that he said he had a drink at the Mountain House Lodge on his way up before his car got stuck in the snow. So he suffers this heart attack. The people don't come help him. He finally, at some point when the gas runs out of his VW and there's no more heat, he decides to walk and get help down at the Mountain House. Finally, it's like, why didn't he do that earlier? So it's just, his story is really strange. And he says when he walked back down the road, he passed up Jack Madruga's Montego. He looked inside the window. He didn't see the keys. He didn't see anybody in it. He saw the wrappers. And he reports this all later. But his story changed quite a bit. And he said, his excuse was, I was suffering a heart attack. I might have been hallucinating some of this story. And it just seemed like the perfect excuse to me. But I'll tell you something I discovered that just seems really coincidental, and it could play into this and it may not. Joseph Shones had an 18-year-old daughter who had a cognitive disability, just like four of the boys. I think it's called dysplasia, something like that. It's a disorder where things that you read and you hear are slower than most people. So it's a cognitive disorder, and I just think that's really strange that the principal witness in this case has a daughter that's similar to four of the boys with a cognitive disability. Could they have possibly crossed paths at the Gateway projects with his daughter, and maybe Carrie was trying to date the guy's daughter or harassing her in some way? I don't know. That's just another theory, kind of of mine, because of things I found out about Joseph Shones. And I also talked to an individual who knew Joseph Shones, and he was 55 years old at the time, and he lived in a place called Berry Creek, California. He would always tell the newspapers he lived in Sacramento. He's always, it's always reported wrong, but at the time the boys went missing, he was living in Berry Creek, which was about an hour away from where Jack's car was found. But anyway, he was just the town drunk. His car was always getting stuck out there, and people would get him unstuck. He wouldn't even thank them. He would just pull off. They said he was constantly telling lies about being in the military and fighting these wars, and he would tell other vets these stories who knew better, and when questioned, he would just double down on his lies. He, his neighbor I talked to, and the neighbor said one day Joe Shones came out of his house. He was just indiscriminately firing a rifle, and this guy was living next door with his cousin, and his cousin's kids were out there, and some of the bullets landed not far away from the kids. And they called the police out. The police did nothing. There was always these heavy speculation that Joe Shones had ties to the police. And I asked this guy, well, what did Joe Shones do for a living? He said, well, we never saw him go anywhere. He lived there with his wife and his daughter. He also had a son, but wasn't living there. He was older. But he said that he claimed he was a drug counselor. Isn't that interesting? Gary had a little bit of drug counseling. And but they never saw Joe Shones go anywhere. And, just a town drunk. Every time he opened his mouth, he was lying. He was drunk most of the time. They started a marijuana farm there on their land, and it was just a debacle. People tried to steal it. The wife was really difficult to deal with. And, he isn't this glowing citizen, unfortunately, from what I've been finding out about the guy. But I did find it just really, really odd that this unusual story from this witness comes from a guy that has a daughter with a disability like the boys. He's got a really checkered past. He's a known liar. So you have to throw that up into the air. Like, is this guy telling the truth or not? Or did he just make this story up just to interject himself? We don't know. The guy I talked to said, I think at the very least, if Joe Shones encountered these boys, he probably sent them off in the wrong direction just for kind of kicks, you know, not like maybe not intending for them to die, but just at the time thought it was funny. That's what he believed. And his cousin that he lived with next door to Joe Shones and his wife believed that Joe Shones was involved somehow with the boy, you know, that happened to the boys, probably intentionally. That was their thought. Obviously, Joe Shones has passed away, but really interesting things that I discovered about him that no one ever knew. No one ever knew much about this witness. It's always talked about being Joe Shones. So that's another theory. Did the boys just get lost and run into this guy, and they tried to help him get his car out of the snow, and he somehow gets them to follow him up that road, fires a gun to, you know, make them run up the mountain. That's possible. Gary being thrown over the Oroville Dam, and one of the guys that was with the bad guy drives them up there. And, you know, that story, I found the genesis of it was someone that the Mathias family knew really well, went to the Mathias' house and told them this story about Gary being thrown over the dam. And they kind of trusted this guy, so they did pretty much believe him. And oddly enough, the guy that told them that story wound up dying of a really mysterious drug overdose about a week after he told them that. He died of a heroin overdose from injecting heroin, and they said this guy never, ever injected drugs. They said he was kind of a pill popper and a drinker, but was never known to do something like heroin, and he died of a heroin overdose. So really strange, and it was just soon after he had told the story about what really happened. He said, yeah, I was there. I saw Gary get thrown over the Oroville Dam, and this is what happened. I think he felt guilty of being there, but he was so scared of the town bully, we'll call him, that no one crossed this guy. Wow. And that was the genesis of the story, and I can tell you it's still very prevalent in that area.
Well, what about the sighting of Gary Mathias in the bar from that girl?
Well, that was Jack Madruga's niece, Kathy, that saw him, and she believes it. So, you know, he never turned up ever since. There was other sightings of Gary during that period, so she wasn't the only one, but. You know, back then, a lot of people thought they saw Gary Mathias, didn't really know him that well. And she told me I knew Gary. You know, I'd met him on several occasions, and I knew who he was. And she, you know, they were in similar ages because Gary was 25 at the time, closer to Kathy's age. And this is strange, and we'll go into it a little deeper. The person, and can't say their name, that they all think threw Gary over the Oroville Dam, later kind of had this conversion in life and tried to clean up his reputation and became a preacher or a pastor. And so this is really strange, and that's kind of how some of the families are referred to him. Well, we think it was this pastor, you know, and of course this was this bad guy back in the day that was responsible for so much mayhem in the area. So I'm talking to Kathy, and she told me a story that was told to her by her Aunt Janet, which was Jack Madruga's older sister. Jack Madruga had two older sisters. He had a brother too named George and a nephew named George, but this was one of Jack Madruga's older sister. Her name was Janet. Well, 6 months before she passed away, I think this was only about a year and a half or so ago from today, she told Kathy that she had been investigating who was responsible for her brother's death. And Jack Madruga's actually, his nickname was Doc. I should have mentioned that. They always called him Doc. He would never hear Jack. It was always Doc. That was his nickname. And she wanted to find out who killed her beloved brother, Doc. And so she had been doing this investigation all through the years after the boys had went missing. And so she told this story to Kathy. And it was about 6 months before she passed away, because Janet passed away about a year ago. So I told her the story about a year and a half ago. And she said, I found the man who I believe was responsible for Doc's death, and of course, all the boys. And this guy was a pastor. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And she said she tracked this guy down and somehow talked him into meeting her at a local bar somewhere around Marysville. I don't know the exact year of this. I'm assuming like 10 or so years after the bodies were found, something like that. And she got the guy to meet her at the bar, and she brought a gun with her. She was planning on taking revenge right there, because the family was just destroyed when Doc was killed. And she basically said, hey, thanks for meeting me. I know who you are, and I know what you did. She had the hand on her gun, and literally had gone there with the intention of just killing him on the spot. She was so angry. And something came over her saying, you can't do this, it's something kind of like something, maybe God, I think it was God came over and said, you can't take a life like that. Just, her conscience got to her, and she just, put the gun back in her purse and just said, I couldn't do it. And, the guy never confessed, but, she claimed acted like he knew that he was responsible. And, well, I'm assuming it's going to be the same person I've been hearing about, right? How many pastors, how many ex-killers turned pastors could there be running around the area, right? And so I said, well, did she tell you this person's name? And, I asked that of Kathy, and she said, yes, she did. And I was like, assuming I was going to hear the name that I knew. And she told me the name, and it didn't match. And I'm like, oh, my God, it's just one of the crazy twists and turns of this game. So after having that name, I asked Gary Mathias' sister, who, by the way, did not know Kathy, Jack Madruga's niece. They didn't know each other. They're from the same area, but it's not that small where you know everybody. But anyway, I asked Tammy, who's Gary's sister, I said, have you ever heard of this name? And she said, well, yeah, I know this person's sister, and I kind of know the family. And I'm like, really? And the name is pretty uncommon. Actually, both of them are pretty uncommon. And, so there's not multiples. It's not like, Dave Johnson or something. And she said, yeah, I know the person. I said, well, is this person, have they ever been a pastor? And she said, no. To my knowledge, the guy's been in construction. So, his whole life. And I said, well, is he still alive? She said, no, he died about, 2 years ago or so, not too long ago. And I'm like, what are the odds, that these wires got crossed with the pastor thing? But I said, did this guy ever know your brother, Gary Mathias? And she said, oh, yeah, he used to run around that whole group. Him and the bad guy. The first pastor I talked about, the bad guy, also hung around with this other person. So I said, were they friends? And she said, well, no one was really friends with the bad guy, the first one, who people believed through Gary over the Orville dam. They said people were friends with him out of total fear.
Wow.
They were just like, this guy was an enforcer. Been in prison, just the guy you didn't mess with. I mean, people, if he wanted to be around you, you'd be around him because you were scared what he'd do to you.
Damn.
And one of those kind of guys. So, but she said, to my knowledge, they weren't friends, but they absolutely knew each other back when the boys went missing, and they were all in that same group. So I thought, did her aunt give her the wrong name by mistake? Did someone give her that name to throw off the trail of the real bad guy? Were these two guys together? I mean, all those possibilities are still out there, but there is a huge tie there because that investigation was done completely separate from the guy telling the Mathias family about what happened to Gary. So there's a lot there, and it's just putting it all together. The people involved, like I said, the guy that originally told the story died mysteriously a week or so after he told the Mathias family that story.
Wow.
About Gary, with the drug overdose. Another guy moved out of the area immediately, and they said that he drove a red step-side truck. Well, the witness the female lady witness in Brownsville remembered seeing a red truck there. And then later, Joe Shones amended his story after I think he heard of that one and said, I think there was a red, a truck or maybe even a red truck that pulled up behind the car that I saw the second time that night that I saw these guys. So I think he probably heard that and just wanted it to look more credible. But there's so much pointing to this foul play with the pastor or the pastor or the guy that hung around. There's so much there. But then you go back to Gary's shoes being in the trailer, and it kind of starts not working again. So that's where we are with this case.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Are you still gathering information on this case, or have you stopped?
I am, but I think, the book is like pre-order still through Amazon, and it'll be ready in 2 days to be able to buy it. It's finished, but you have to, when you do a pre-order with Amazon, it makes you wait or whatever. But I'm thinking when the book gets out and gets disseminated, especially in the area, some of the family members that I talked to, and I had full access to 3 of the families, which was amazing.
Wow.
No one's ever gotten anything out of Mathias. I had full, obviously I talked to George Madruga, Kathy Madruga, she has a different last name now, and the Hewitts answered all the questions that I sent to them through their daughter-in-law of Jackie Hewitt's brother, which was really helpful in communicating with me. And she said, well, if you send me all your questions, I'll get, the brother to answer all of them,
Wow.
And immediately the Hewitts were like, the damn story, they're heavy on that. The Weirs didn't want to make a comment. They're still there. Ted Weir had 2 brothers and a sister. His brothers were Dallas and Perry Weir. And I talked to Perry a little bit. He said, just not really wanting to talk about it. But I think the Weirs still believe that Gary had some involvement. I talked to one of Bill Sterling's twin sisters, and it's really sore for these families. You know, you still feel a loss, and his Bill Sterling's sister didn't want to talk at all. She said, anything we know is already out there, please. We don't want to talk about this. It's so painful. And these families had other tragedies in their lives. Like, you know, I just mentioned Bill Sterling. His father, Jim, was killed in a boating accident. Bill Sterling had another brother. He went by the nickname Goober. He was, drove a motorcycle. He was killed just a year after Bill Sterling's remains were found on his motorcycle. So many tragedies. Wow. It's just unbelievable. Jack Madruga's, one of his nephews, Rick, was in a bad car accident. I think that was in '79. He's quadriplegic, and Kathy takes care of her brother Rick. And there's so many tragedies, you just wouldn't believe it. And just outside of this loss, it's unbelievable when you hear about it. It's just really sad because these guys were such good guys, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about them. Like I really feel like I know Jack Madruga. I mean, his favorite TV show is I Love Lucy.
Oh.
He loved to dance. Yeah, he loved to dance to Motown. He loved to play Motown music. He loved the Supremes, and he'd dance to it.
Oh.
And I mean, Jackie Hewitt had his beloved beagle named Bo that he'd play with all the time, and he had a little bitty motorcycle he'd run around. The Hewitts had a little land, and he did that. Really sweet guys. Ted Weir, always wondered why he couldn't throw the ball. He couldn't play baseball as well as Mickey Mantle. Because he was a pretty good athlete. Those boys were, especially Jack Madruga and Ted Weir. They're pretty good athletes, and they're just sweet guys. That's why they just call them simply the boys. I mean, just good-natured guys, and I mean, just so sweet. And when it just devastated their families. Jack Madruga's mother, Melba, passed away probably just 5 months after the police came over to their house that day. And Kathy was actually there. She was staying in Doc's bedroom, and she had a dream, and she could hear a voice. She was sleeping in her uncle's bed, her Uncle Doc's bed. This was a day before that they actually found his remains, and she could hear a man talking, and she could see a figure in the corner of the room, and she's like, Doc, is that you? And he walked out of the shadows, and it was him, and he was basically, according to her, saying goodbye.
Wow.
And his basketball jersey for the game the next day was still hanging on the door, his Gateway Gators jersey, and literally after that happened to her, the next day the police came to the door and said, we have some bad news.
Oh.
And her poor grandmother, Melba, was just so distraught you couldn't believe it. She just kept saying, I want to see him, I want to see him. And they couldn't explain to her there's really nothing to see. It's just scattered bones. And she had a hard time accepting that. And she died about 5 months after that, literally from a broken heart. She had emphysema and some medical issues, but I think it was a broken heart. That's what the family believes. It's just a broken heart killed her.
Now the boys,
her beloved boy.
The boys, the four boys minus Gary Mathias, they were in this Gateway program, and they had been together for some time, I'm assuming, because they were really good buddies. When then Gary joined Gateway, do you know how long it had been? What was so the four boys were in Gateway, and then here's Gary. He joins Gateway, and he latches onto them. Do you know how long he was with them when this incident happened?
From what I know, it was about 8 or so months before they went missing that Gary was really hanging around the group a lot. I think it was about 8 months before they went missing. Gary came to Gateway for drug counseling, and that's as per his sister. And that's the first thing I said is, why is Gary even there? It's kind of for these guys that have these kind of cognitive issues, not people that have mental problems. Because Gary was getting treatment at the Sutter Hospital. They had a doctor there that would kind of do his medicines for him and get him on the right combination. But he was going for some drug counseling because he had obviously big problems in the past with street drugs, and just getting some counseling there at the Gateway projects. And Gary was with the counselor there, and somehow it came up that, hey, we got these guys who want to play basketball, and there's actually a great narrative book about it, but these guys that they want to play basketball, and we need someone to show them, because Gary was an athlete himself. He played linebacker actually in Marysville High School, how he wound up meeting the guys, because they wanted someone there at the Gateway that was, didn't have any cognitive problems to kind of teach these guys how to play better. And Jack was already a really good athlete, and I don't think he needed much help. But Jackie still needed help. It was kind of weird when Jackie would touch the ball, because Jackie was very slow, of course. And, Ted was pretty good, and then Bill needed a lot of help. So Gary was introduced to the guys to help them literally play basketball. So that's how he kind of found his way into the five. And it was about 8 months prior to them disappearing that Gary was kind of become a part of that group. And another real strange thing about Gateway Projects, of course, it started in 1971. They had a facility there in Yuba City, but there was a strange series of arson attacks on the Gateway facility in 1975, 3 years before the boys went missing. It was firebombed one night, a building got burned to the ground, someone threw a Molotov cocktail through a window. And they know, the police thought there was no tie to the case, but I'm not so sure myself. One of the directors there was actually killed by being firebombed in his apartment there in Yuba City in 1975. So somebody was targeting him or the Gateway Project in 1975. And, it's not known to this day if that had any tie to the Yuba County 5 going missing. But it's just another one of those strange things that was going on that could tie into it. Really, really strange. Like I said, Joe Shones, everything I found out about the guy is not good. I do know that the boys used to love to bowl. They would go bowling in Sacramento. Some in Yuba City, they go to Sacramento, and they'd also go to Sacramento to practice basketball at a facility in Sacramento. And they went to dances for, actually we call it special needs now, but special needs type people in Sacramento. So there would have been females there. Was Joe Shones' daughter maybe at one of these? I don't know. My personal speculation that there could have been some kind of contact there. But there's all these really weird things that tie in. Now, when I talked about the bad guy, you know who that is now. The guy that threw Gary, allegedly, remember that, threw Gary Mathias over the Oroville Dam on February 24th, 1978. I talked about the second person that was found out by Kathy Madruga's aunt, Janet. That person had a little brother that was mysteriously murdered in 1975. And some of those family members think that Pastor number one, who threw Gary over the Oroville Dam, killed this man, Pastor number two's little brother.
Oh, my God.
How weird is that?
Yeah.
Very mysterious circumstances. I mean, it's actually kind of a known case. The little boy was only 12 years old. This guy had a lot of siblings, but the little boy was this man's youngest brother. He's 12. And, skipped school one day, went to like a watering hole there in Yuba County, and it was actually on some land that was owned by the Marysville Democrat newspaper, which is really odd, or near it or something. Or actually, they found his body on land that was owned by the Marysville Democrat, which is kind of strange too. But they surmised that there's some younger kids his age were there at the watering hole, and the other kids went home, and then some adults showed up, including the bad man, we'll call him, and the bad man did in this little boy at 12 years old out of just meanness or revenge on the brother, or who knows. But so strange that all these things intertwine and connect.
The boys, was that the first time they had gone to Chico to watch Gateway basketball?
It was actually, they were going to see the Chico State, at Chico State to watch 13 play, which was UC Davis. I don't know. I think they had before. Yeah, I think they had gone to some things like that before. Not very often, but I do know that they were they did not want Gary to go with them that night. I can tell you that.
So they had taken that trip before without Gary, and they made it home, and they made it home safely. So here comes Gary on that trip with them, and look what happens. Yeah, I mean, Gary, just Gary being there could have inadvertently been. Of course, if Gary was the target of these bad guys, and they just happened to be with his friends that night, and they thought maybe they didn't have the stomach to do away with the other four, so they just thought, well, what are we going to do with these guys? Let's just run them up into the forest. We don't want to kill them all. We already got, the guy we want, which was Gary. He's dead. He was thrown over the dam.
let's just get these other guys driving far up the road. Hey, you over there, here, take this man's car and drive him up there. But there's still so many things against that theory, because I so believe that Jack drove his own car up there, because it's the only thing that would explain why the underside was so clean. So there's, you always can start building something here, and then it kind of falls apart. But it's got to be a combination, and the families definitely believe it was foul play, one way or the other.
Yeah.
Any way you look at it, foul play.
I had read that Jack Madruga would not let anybody drive his car. He wouldn't let anybody drive his car. That's absolutely true. And then
usually a family member could in rare circumstances, but that is true. He would not let anyone drive his baby.
The thing is, okay, so I want to just say a little something about, the car's stuck in the snow. Now, whether they realized it or not, that they could have lifted it out of that snow, but if they were being chased and they were scared. Now, Madruga, and who was the other fellow he was with? Hewitt?
Yeah. The boys, they were all together.
No, because Weir went to the trailer.
Weir made it to the trailer. That's obviously a fact, and they surmised that Gary did, and they also believe that Jackie did, but they don't know for sure, which is another strange thing about this case. And I know everything there is to know about it, every newspaper article. I have never seen anywhere where they ever fingerprinted the Forest Service trailer or Jack Madruga's car. Because if you've got fingerprint dusted, I don't know, maybe you can't do it when it's that cold. I don't know. But you think they would have at least done it to show if Gary was there or not. It looks like Gary was there because his sneakers were found there.
Right.
And another thing is, according to his sister, Tammy, Gary would journal. He would one of his counselors taught him to journal, write little affirmations on a notepad, you're going to make it, you're going to be all right. Just things to keep him on track. And that's something that he actually did. And he would have this little notebook, but it wound up just kind of falling apart after a while. So he just had those little loose sheets of paper with him, and he'd say, you're great, Gary. You're doing good, Gary. Just little notes to himself, affirmations like that. And his sister, Tammy, went up to the trailer with her then husband and looked around. She remembered going in the trailer, and it was just a total disaster. This is, of course, not long after they took Ted's body out, but the trailer was still open. And she said she looked down and picked up a piece of paper like Gary would carry in Gary's handwriting that had an affirmation on it. And didn't, and I think she might have found more than one, but it didn't, reveal anything that what happened to them. It was just something that Gary wrote, like, hey, Gary, you're gonna get through this. Like, he was struggling, but he was trying to keep himself going, and he wrote on that piece of paper. So
okay, you know what?
Sign that Gary made it.
Drew, I found online, and I had done this in my previous show on this. There was a notepad that was found. There was a notepad that was found. It was just a little one, with the wire at the top. It's just like a 5x3 or something, little notepad. And it says our basketball tournament is Saturday, February 25th at 9:50 at Sierra College in Sacramento. But at the very top.
I'm pretty sure that was Ted's. I think that was Ted's, where it says Gateway Gators were number one.
Okay, but wait a minute.
On it, yeah.
At the very top of that notepad, it looks like it says we're lost.
I think it says we're number one because it says Gateway Gators on it.
No, it doesn't say.
That's a pretty famous photo.
It doesn't say number one. It just says we're, and he spells it WEARE. And
yeah, that was Ted's, and it said Gateway Gators. I think it says it's believed to say we're number one. Because it was some pride for the team, and I think he wrote that sometime leading up to the game. But Gary's was separate, and according to his sister, Gary's writing was on it, But I think the one you're talking about was Ted's. But no, I never heard anything saying we're lost. I think they think it just said we're number one or something like that.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you on Facebook. It doesn't say we're number one. It says we're something, but I always thought it said we're lost.
I'm not aware of that. If there is, Yeah, this one's kind of well known. I mean, the one that Ted had.
Okay.
With Ted Gateway Gators on it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's another interesting thing. You know, did Gary make it? Did Gary make it to the trailer and get out of those woods? Did she see him? And then did he get out of the area? I mean, the guy was a scrapper. He was a survivor. He could have made it out.
You know,
was he thrown over the Oroville Dam? Why do people believe that so strongly? I can tell you some of them, they are convinced that's what happened. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because the story was just told so many times. There has to be something more to it. Why do they so believe that? And if that did happen, how do the shoes get to the trailer?
His they were heavy leather shoes, and they were gone.
They were gone, and they think that Gary took them, and they were better to strike out on his own. So a lot of people think Gary just got further away. He's a little better to do it, and I think it's something just with Gary's mental illness that made him. He was just in some kind of weird survival mode. With the schizophrenia and being the way he is. And something about Gary Mathias that I found out from his sister was, Gary had really bad vision, by the way. He had double vision, and he had just started wearing contacts about the time they went missing. I actually have a photograph given to me by his sister that was taken a week before the boys went missing, and Gary's not wearing glasses. Never been seen before, and people will see it, of course, when they can get this book in a couple of days. That's a great photo of Gary, because he's not wearing these heavy, thick glasses. And Gary had such poor eyesight because when he was 10 years old, he was being driven in the family car, and he was leaning against the door, and he fell out of the car, and he hit his head really hard, and blood everywhere, and he took him to the hospital, and he couldn't see for, I think it was 5 days. He couldn't see at all until the swelling went down, and then his vision started coming back, but he had double vision after that. And my kind of theory is that was the genesis of this whole case of the Yuba County 5. Gary falling out of the car at 10 years old, causing this schizophrenia and this madness that would become on this guy. Of course, his sister will tell you that all his trouble started after he was in the military, because that was such a bad thing for him. But I think the genesis was falling out of the car and hitting his head so hard, and maybe that becoming the strange odyssey that became Gary Mathias with this incident.
Well, what's really sad is
glasses.
What's really sad is Madruga had the keys in his pocket in his pants.
That's true.
And he was with his other friend. Why didn't they just go back and try and get into the car and start it and go?
That's the question. That's what they don't know. And I'm telling you, I talked to George Madruga, which is his nephew, and they were very close. And, he will verify anything about the guy. He said, I don't understand why this whole thing is this, with Jack, he goes, I'm telling you, the guy was in the military. He was actually smart, according to George. He was just painfully shy. He was just so shy when he wasn't around family or people he was comfortable with, like, the other three. He was just really shy. It's just somebody that today you'd consider on the spectrum. He said, I'm telling you, my uncle absolutely knew how to turn that car around when he was lost. He said he would have known. He said he's not some dummy. He's like, he would have known how to turn that car around. He would have known how to get it unstuck. He would have never left the window down, because he would never leave his car that way. But that's true. They did find the keys in his pocket, which kind of backs my theory up that he drove it up that road. But why? Why? And if he did drive it up that road, he's obviously driving it carefully to protect the bottom of his car he's so proud of. But I can only surmise he's slowly following somebody, whatever turned bad against him didn't happen yet, because these people, whoever he's following, are going slow enough to let Jack follow him. And he's just taking it as easy. These people are thinking, what's wrong with this guy? I know it's at night, it's freezing outside, but why is he driving so slow? But that does back up my theory that he drove his own car up that road. Mm-hmm. So what I think might have happened, maybe they run into Joe Schoen somewhere again, and he's like, hey, I need help, or I got to get up here to my cabin. It's a little further up the road. Why don't you follow me? And then at some point, Schoen's just, gets mad, and maybe not intending for anyone to die, pulls out a gun and starts shooting in the air and says, get out of here. Something like that. I mean, that's the best I could come up with, knowing all what I know. And, there was reports, there were shell casings found around Madruga's car around Rogers Cow
there
Camp. And,
were.
you know, it could have been from anybody, but that's a heavy rumor.
Wow.
You won't find it in a newspaper, but it's highly speculated. Some family members I talked to said, absolutely, there were shell casings found, you know, which leads me to believe someone fired a gun into the air and said, you know, you scared them up into that mountain. I mean, it's probable as anything I can think of, but it still wouldn't explain why they're that far away now. No fire, didn't open up more food, didn't do any of that stuff. It just makes no sense.
Okay, I have another question. What about up in the forest, if there isn't a real bright full moon, you can't see your hand in front of your face. If that was the case, and they didn't have any flashlights, they would have never been able to find the car anyway. Do you know if they had flashlights?
I don't know. They did find a flashlight, the remains of a flashlight somewhere, not real far from where the bodies were found, but it could never be determined if it belonged to them. They don't think that there was one inside Jack's car at the time. And it does get that dark up there, like you're saying. It absolutely does. That's why it was a popular theory with the authorities that they did find that trail left by the snowcat. And it was like, you know, the around the corner syndrome, as they call it. Like they thought, okay, surely there's a house or something here because there's this defined path in the snow that the snowcat left. And they just kept going further and further, hoping to find this place. And they, you know, two of the guys succumb, being Sterling and Madruga, and then maybe the other three make it into the trailer. The window's broken. That's how they accessed it. Ted winds up dying. Gary cares for him for a while. Maybe Jackie's there too, and then Jackie leaves at the same time and winds up dying. They just don't know, but they think that they, you know, maybe did find that trail, and they just kept thinking something's got to be at the end of this. And they just kept going. You know, by the time they had gone long enough, they couldn't turn around. But it's really unusual to go up a mountain and not down when you're lost. I mean, if you're walking like that, why would they go up and not down? I mean, it's just, even for people that had, you know, obviously Gary was schizophrenic. He was on his medication. Like, he should have been thinking, if it was just a normal situation where they're lost, and let's just say the car, they thought it was stuck and couldn't get it out, they would have known to walk down the hill. And they probably would have passed Mountain House themselves and a few more structures where there were people 5 or 6 miles back down the Oroville-Quincy Highway. Why wouldn't they go that way? Especially Gary, that would have known better. So there's things that kind of point, you know, that maybe Gary was done in before he got that far, because it would explain why they didn't walk down the hill. It would explain why a fire wasn't started, because Gary would have known how to do that, been into more food. So there's things that support that too. So it's just one of those wild things.
Wow. So what are you going to... I have the link underneath this video. I have the link to your Amazon and to your YouTube channel. And so they can find your YouTube channel and the link for your book. So with this book now, I had asked you before, but did you have more information after this book was completed?
No, because it was just completed. Really not. Nothing really more, really at all. You know, there's one thing that I didn't mention. It's kind of, you know, there's all kind of little things, a lot of stuff people that know this case already know, but there was a strange phone call that happened sometime after the boys went missing, to a lady in the Yuba City area, and her name was Debbie Lynn Reese. And a guy called her that she didn't know, kind of like a prank call, and he says, and she picked up the phone, and a man on the other end says, "I hurt those guys really bad." And she's like, "Who is this?" And he hung up. And he called back the next day to this woman and said, "They're all dead," and hangs up the phone. And that was a really strange thing. And there was never really any ties. I don't know why he called this lady or not. But I asked Gary's sister, and I said, "Have you ever heard of this lady, Debbie Lynn Reese, in Yuba City?" She said, "No, I don't recognize the name, but on my mom's side, we are related to the Reese family." So that was kind of odd. You know, it's just little things like that pop up.
Wow.
You know, I think it was probably just a prank call, because it's still, if the guys were all dead, obviously Ted lived for another 8 to 10 weeks. So, you know, it's just there's strange things that come up. But most of everything that I do know, almost everything's in there, other than some names I did not divulge for obvious reasons. Obviously, one of these people running around there is still alive. So there's some anonymity there. The guy that knew Joe Shones, I protect that. I think the guy, I didn't knowing that guy, he wouldn't mind talking to anybody about what he knew about Joe Shones, but I don't reveal everything about him, but he loves to talk about him. But there's certain things that I didn't publish, just for obvious reasons.
Wow. Well, that book is going to be some book. Everybody, you can find the information underneath this video where you can get Drew's book. Now, Drew, you have another case that I'm absolutely, it's just the Zodiac. And
absolutely.
I wanted to do this show first, but next year, will you come back and we do the Zodiac?
Yeah, we definitely do. Yeah, you being in the Bay Area, we definitely need to do it.
Oh yes, I would love to. Drew, I can't tell you what a pleasure it was to have you on the show. I think you're the only one that has gotten the information from the real people. I don't think anybody else has done that.
No, they really haven't. Like I said, two of the families aren't really talking at all, and I got really fortunate to get full access to three of them.
Wow. That's really awesome. And thank you so much for coming on my show. It was such a pleasure.
You. I enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, this was so awesome, this show. I loved it. And I found out some more information because this case is just so bizarre. It's just so bizarre. Really so it's just going to be another one of those. They're not are they working on it anymore?
On this case, no. But I hope something sparks with this information. There's some names I do mention in the book. So hopefully it'll spark a memory. It'll spark a connection to the people that are still there, because these families they do. They really want to have closure and to know what happened to their loved one. I mean, for the survivors, the surviving family members, it's almost like it happened yesterday for them, with Tammy and Kathy and George and the Hewitt family. The wounds are still so deep. It's just still so tragic. What happened to these guys? They were just so lovable. They were the boys. Like Ted Weir would wave at people excitedly, and he'd get upset when they wouldn't wave back at him. I mean, just sweet guys. It's just absolute tragedy.
Oh, what a shame! It's really a sad story. It truly is. Well, Drew, I want to thank you so much. Good luck with the new book coming out, and everybody too. There's Drew's link to his YouTube channel, and he has a lot of videos on the Zodiac and also the Cooper guy. What was that guy?
Yeah, E.B. Cooper.
Yeah.
E.B. Cooper. Well, I talk about my suspect, an elite Special Forces Vietnam veteran named Ted B. Braden. And the exciting thing about that is just today in the mail, I got some DNA from one of his blood relatives that I hope to get tested with another project I'm working on with someone else. So that's just a little sneak preview there, but I'm really excited about it.
Wow. Well, I will continue to search out your YouTube channel, see what else you come up with, because that's how I found that you had written this book. And like I said, it was a really, really pleasure, Drew, to have you on the show. It was just, I'm so excited to have you on, and the information that you gave to me and to the viewers it's so awesome. Thank you so much, Drew. Thank you. And this worked out. This worked out with the phone.
Yeah, I hope so. Sorry about all the technical problems. I hope everybody stay with it. You have some really loyal followers.
Yep, I do. Okay, Drew, thank you so much. Hey, happy holidays to you, Drew, too. And I'll talk with you next year, huh? We'll do a show together.
Yeah, sounds great. Looking forward to that, too.
Oh, thanks so much, Drew. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Noreen. Good night.
Good night. Oh, God. So awesome. Okay. Hopefully he can get his Skype fixed. So, everybody, thank you so much for bearing with me on this. Robert, my techie, he cannot figure out what happened. Thank God for Robert. We're going to work on this and hopefully have it all figured out by January, because this just isn't right. Anyway, thank you so much to the mods for being here. Let's see, we got Chipateri, Renee. I know Annie was here also earlier. Oh, Tall Cross, Noreen's the boss. Tall Cross, Scotland, yay. Annie was here because I saw her earlier. Jimmy Cortez, honey, so happy to see you. How you doing? You know, Jimmy lost his mom a couple months ago, and it was really sad. We love you, Jimmy. So Chipateri, Renee, and I know, like I said, I know Annie was here. Thank you for the mods for being here. Without them, you guys wouldn't have the awesome chat room that you have. And also, my gosh, I saw I Am Alpha and Chipateri. Thank you so much for the, what do they call that? That money. Thank you so much. That was really nice of you. Like I said again, thank you so much for sticking out with me. And God. Anyway, so what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to have to edit this show, and I'm going to lose my chat. And that's what's so not nice about YouTube. You can't make any changes or you lose all your stuff. But I have to do it because there's just stuff on here that when people rewatch, and this show will get a lot of views, that they don't need to hear. Especially, I didn't know you guys could hear me in the beginning. So let me do. Oh, listen, I talk to Royce every Monday. Royce still has issues, but he's working on building a new computer. So he's hoping to have everything straightened out by January. And then we're going to do a couple of shows, some ghost pictures that he's been capturing. So hang in there. Royce will be back with us. He's trying really, really hard. So let me do some shout outs, okay, guys? Renee, of course, Lisa Scarrett, Anna Boline, Jimmy Cortez, M. Dane, Paul Kitchen, Toll Cross. Let's see, a lot of you are going now. Oh, there's Unique Annie. There you are, honey. Oh, no. Oh, go take your meds, Annie. Gosh, I didn't know you were hurting. You didn't have to come in tonight, honey. Chipateri, Renee. I Am Alpha. Okay. Anita Ackerman. Brandy Talent. Let's see. Beat 3 Airspace. Thank you, Chipper. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of you are going now. But that's okay. I hope you, Lori Miller, Alicia Franco, love you too, honey. Dave Cisneros. Oh, I know that name. Anybody else? Karen Piotti. That's really hard. Betty Spaghetti. Oh, I want spaghetti. That sounds good. Oh, no way. River Culver. Wow. Wow. Welcome back. Anybody else? I know I missed that we had a nice crowd. It was a big crowd. It was very nice. Let's see, anybody else? It's hard to see. And let's see, anybody else? Did I miss anybody? Okay. Okay, I don't think, yeah. All right, guys. So, thanks again so much for being here. You know, this girl on Facebook contacted me. She is a psychic, and I'm not sure if she's a remote viewer, but she's called a rescue. And she does rescue work where she looks for people that have disappeared. And so I have to ask her. I'm going to have her on the show, because if she's a remote viewer, we can do some of those David Pilate shows, 411 Missing, and some other disappearances, because that's my favorite. I love true crime. That is my absolute favorite. And then I got 5 other emails for people that want to come on the show, and each one of them it'll be a different topic. But I'm really looking forward to this. Her name is Melinda. I forget what her last name is, but I'm really going to check her out, because I would love to do that. And I was going to have Vanessa back too. So we got some good shows already starting to line up for next year, but it'll still be every other Thursday. So everybody, I want you to have a happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, and Oh, Keith Starks. Okay, sorry, Keith. I did Lori Miller. Sorry. George Madruga. George Madruga. Are you any relation? You're welcome. And thank Drew for writing the book. Dust Bunny. I don't think anybody else is going to be able to do what he did. Contacting the relatives. I don't think. In fact, I think, I'm not sure if he's the only one that I know of that has written a book. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to next year. I'm hoping to God that 2021 will be a much better year. It can't get any worse. So everybody, I love you guys. Thank you so much for hanging with me. And I'm going to contact my Robert now. Contact him. We got to get things straightened out. So I love you guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you next year. Melinda Lyons? I don't think that's her last name. That doesn't sound familiar. No way, George. Jack was your uncle? Did Drew know you were coming into the show? I have to let him know. Are you on Facebook, George? Drew was really lucky to get the information. He's the only one that's done that. And it was a pleasure, George, and I'm so sorry for your loss. I'll have to let Drew know you were in the chat. Wow. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Love you, and I'll see you next year, okay? Thank you. Good night.